Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
So, I want to thank the previous panel. And now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into one component of the affordable housing continuum, what it takes to get housing built. From concept, design, securing funding, construction to lease up for typical projects in communities across Oregon. So we're going to hear from nonprofit housing developers on the opportunities and challenges that they're facing associated with constructing new regulated affordable housing in rural communities. We're going to be hearing from a representative from Oregon Housing Community Services about their new application process, the ORCA, for how folks who want to propose development projects can access resources from the state and federal government. And then also we're going to have folks talk about the new systems for providing technical assistance to local jurisdictions from Land Community Development Department with the state, and also with Business Oregon about upcoming resources for access to infrastructure to help connect housing projects to utilities. So to get us going, let's introduce the panelists. If you could just briefly share your name, title, organization, and I think we're might be changing this a little bit. There's one panelist who needs a little bit more time. How about we wait for you till the end, Ed, and then I'll let the other two panelists. I want to start with the two nonprofit housing developers. They can take a couple minutes just to maybe highlight one or two key points about this topic, and then Sean and Becky, and then Ed, will let you do you have a longer presentation about the ORCA process. So, Clayton?
Yeah, Clayton Crowhurst, he, him, and y'all pronouns. And I'm with Northwest Housing Alternatives. We're an affordable housing development nonprofit across the state.
And I'm Brian Carlton. I am here representing Terri Silvis, so I'm actually with Carlton Hart Architecture. But Terri Silvis is the CEO of Horizon Projects, Inc. out of Milton Freewater, and she was going to be on the panel today, could not be here due to an emergency with one of their group homes back in Milton Freewater. So I found out last night I was going to step in and take her seat. So I'm here representing a particular project that we've just completed in Pendleton, so kind of a case study as we're talking about challenges, and we'll have challenges and success stories to lend to the conversation.
Awesome. My name is Sean Edging. I'm a housing planner at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Sorry, I guess I'm a little too close to the mic. I know we're talking to a big room here, and not everybody might be familiar with the LCD. We're the statewide kind of land use planning agency. We administer a program that's pretty unique to Oregon, where our communities kind of plan for their futures and touch on a variety of kind of different statewide goals that touch on a lot of them. One of those being housing, and I would say right now we're at a pretty significant inflection point where DLCD's role is really changing, and we're really taking a lot of additional kind of actions and supporting our local partners in actually facilitating the production of housing and achieving the outcomes that we want to see, which we'll of course get into as we get into the panel.
Sorry, we're still getting our things figured out. I'm Becky Baxter. I'm with Business Oregon, which is the state's Community and Economic Development Department. I am the new Housing Infrastructure Coordinator. I've been doing this job for 2 weeks, so be nice to me. I've been with Business Oregon since 2011. Prior to that, I was the program coordinator for the Special Public Works Fund, which many of you are familiar with, does municipally owned infrastructure. I've also been a CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Coordinator, so I think I've got a fairly good knowledge of what we can help you with. So with that, I'll turn it to Ed.
Hello, I'm Ed Brown, and I work for Oregon Housing Community Services, specifically in the Affordable Rental Housing Division. My preferred pronouns are he, him. So within ARHD, and if we can go ahead and pull up the slides, sorry, I broke the forum where we're going to go ahead and do some Q&A and talk about some panel questions, but I also wanted to give some groundwork on what we've done with OHCS. And want to say really appreciate Tanisha, kind of laid the ground for a number of the things that I'm really excited to talk about. So yeah, we have a brand new group within our division, which is the applications team, and I'm the current manager of that new group. So we've been around since roughly January, and that really coincides a lot with the new ORCA process, which I kind of want to give you a little bit of information about before we kind of get into some of the discussion. So next slide. So Tanisha mentioned, and I think really what's behind a lot of the change that we've seen at OHCS is that back-to-back legislative investment that we've seen. And so it's really created a lot of change within OHCS, because each biennium we keep doubling the record investment from the state, and then we double that double, and then double the doubling to where we're at today, where we really have a record number of funds, of programs, and really capacity within OHCS to reach the need statewide and really dive more deeply into certain topics where we have specialists that are in so many new areas and avenues. And so that kind of led to a growth pattern that eventually kind of got insustainable. So when I was hired with OHCS, I came on in 2016. We had roughly 2 NOFA that year, and that stands for Notice of Funding Availability. Since that time last year in 2023, we had a record 13 NOFA. And for anybody that doesn't know, it's a 40 to 60 page lengthy legalese type of document that is, it became really difficult internally. It really became very, very difficult externally for our partners to keep up with all of the different opportunities. And so that's kind of what's behind why we shifted gears and we made a really big shift this year. We created the ORCA, which is the Oregon Centralized Application Process. And so we really wrapped our hands around all of the different policy changes and differences between all those NOFA and really centralized all of that. So it's kind of a one-stop, centralized and efficient standards for all of our funding resources. And so that's something that we're really excited about. It's going to make a huge difference for newer developers coming to OHCS with questions about how to get started. Yeah. Oh, let me go ahead and skip past this slide. Sorry, I had to shrink down the number of things that we were going to go ahead and talk about. This is good. Yeah, I'll go ahead and pick up from here. So this map is a representation of the number of projects that we've seen come into the new ORCA process. The new ORCA process is something that really deconstructs the former process, which was a single point in time application that was reviewed and scored competitively and then awarded. We've deconstructed that to where the new applications process takes an evaluation over a period of time, and it really gets OHCS involved with developers much earlier in the development life cycle, so that we really get in at a point where we're just talking about the concept of the project. And that's something that OHCS has never been able to do before in the past, to kind of get an early understanding of the types of the need that's out there. Previously, we would have an application at a point in the project's life cycle that we called it shovel ready. And at that point, it was really a little bit too late for us to make really direct policy impact on the types of projects that we were receiving. We were basically receiving them fully baked, fully funded, and we're the last funder. With the new ORCA process, like I said, we're getting involved with our communities and developers much sooner in that process, and able to have more of an iterative conversation about the project and the funding resources that we have available. And so that's something that's really exciting. So the first step of this 3-step applications process is actually really the front door, and that's our intake form. And I like to refer to the intake form as kind of like a coin sorter. No matter what your need is, what kind of developer you are, what kind of project you have, our new intake form is really able to direct all of that and help us get an understanding of who you are, what your project is about, what that community need is, and kind of where you're at in that development planning. So that's what our new intake form does. And so we're excited about that. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that we've seen in our new intake form, we have 15 projects. As of yesterday, we had, sorry, let me start over. as of yesterday, we have 100 applications that have come in through that intake form that are currently filling out applications with our new system. 15 of those are represented here in Eastern Oregon. We've had up 20 projects go ahead and complete an application for that first step, the impact assessment step of the ORCA process, that are under some level of review by OHCS staff. Of those, 2 of them are represented by projects that are here in Eastern Oregon. And so something that I kind of wanted to relate to you all, it's again, something that we're excited to see, that we're able to spread resources and get developers from throughout Oregon into our new applications system. And sorry, I keep craning my head back. I should have come prepared with printed slides. But something that's new with the ORCA process this year is regional set-asides. So we have Western, Metro, and Eastern Oregon. And so of all of the funding resources that we have available for this biennium, we have a 75% set aside regionally to ensure that we're pushing resources out to all of Oregon and not any one particular area where it's getting concentrated. And so that's another new and exciting component of our planning with the Oregon centralized application. All right, let's go ahead and move to the next one. Oh, yeah, let me go ahead and skip this one as well. All right. I don't have enough time to talk to you about everything. I could really take a couple hours on this, but what is exciting is you actually can get, we have recordings already where I have gone into a lot greater depth on a lot of the changes and exciting new developments of the ORCA process. And so if you just Google OHCS, we're going to be the first result there. And if you go onto our landing page, you'll see the Oregon centralized application. Our comms team has done a beautiful job of helping us develop all new pages for the ORCA. So I know, notoriously government websites are difficult to navigate. This one proudly is not. I feel really excellent about these web pages. And so if you want to know anything about the ORCA, go here, go to our new sites. Again, if you go down to Get Help with ORCA, you're going to find all of our new training videos on our process and about our systems. You're going to find the questions portal. If you have any questions about housing development, you can send them in through our questions portal anytime. That provides us a system of being able to route those questions to the subject matter expert that needs to respond to those. So you don't have to go and look and hope that you've reached the right person. We do that for you. Just ask your question. We'll get that routed. That also provides us a system for ensuring that we're responding back to you timely. So that's our new questions portal. We also have a brand new technical advisory group. So in addition to the applications team, we have a TA team that is dedicated to helping, again, rural, nonprofit, folks that are new to housing development. We have a whole team that's dedicated to helping connect the dots, in addition to the support that the applications team is able to provide in helping connect a lot of dots with our system. And so Kate Allen is actually the technical advisory group's TA team. There she is. I want to let you know that she's here today as well. And so we're really excited to be able to have more capacity and tools than ever to be able to help you come to OHCS and get the expert advice that you need. So in the past, it was always, hey, we're new to this. Where do we get started? It's like, well, here's a library of information, and if you survive that litmus test, then go ahead and come back to us. Now we're able to help you connect those dots. So you can ask any questions you need. We'll help source you the information that you need at the time that you need it. All right, and then last slide. I guess I should have come to this a little bit earlier, but basically that wraps it up. So more tools than ever that we have with the OHCS. And so I'm really excited about that, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. I'll give it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Ed. And I want to ask Kate, can you stand up just so people can see you? Put a name to or face to the name. And maybe, are there other technical advisors here? Do you want to stand up so you know who to talk to? So it's Desi. So feel free to go talk to them or Ed afterward during lunch or the rest of the day and help plug you into the ORCA system. So I think we're going to do, so you guys don't want to make additional or opening comments. We'll just go into the questions. All right. So, developing regulated affordable housing projects is challenging, we know, with complicated capital stacks and layers of regulations affecting the pre-development, construction, and lease-up processes, resulting in lengthier timelines to get projects up and running. So as developers, I want to invite Clayton and Brian first. As developers, and also the representatives of the government agencies, what are some of the challenges and barriers that you're facing in developing affordable housing, especially any unique circumstances for development in communities of Eastern Oregon? Clayton?
Yeah, and I was going to say, Ed, do y'all have an unofficial banner hanging up in your offices now that's Orca? It's a whale of a funding application or something like that?
For our launch party, we actually had a giant blow up, like floaty, and taped a hard hat to it. Yeah.
Awesome. I was hoping something like that existed out there. So, yeah, I think, most of the folks in this room can probably guess at least a couple of the challenges I'll lead off with. Availability of funding everywhere across rural Oregon and especially Eastern Oregon. There is no other well to go to or gap resource. I know I've sent these emails to Ed and probably half of the other PAs at OHCS working on projects. I kind of feel like Bernie Sanders at this point, where it's like I'm once again asking you for more gap funding on my project. We have been hammered by interest rates, lumber costs, subcontractors who go under a week before construction closing, just a myriad of challenges on the uses side that then cause us to have to scramble to come up with sources. I'm not going to say it's easy to get sources in the metro area or in Western Oregon. It's damn near impossible to get gap fill sources for Eastern Oregon projects. And so that's definitely one of the big barriers and challenges, and why projects typically take a lot longer is when you do get that new construction cost estimate, you're not able to turn back around and react to that and get additional funding within 2 to 4 months. You might put that project on ice for another year or two while you go out and go through a whole nother funding application cycle. I think one of the other ones that probably won't surprise y'all is just staff capacity among both for-profits and nonprofits. Everybody in this room who is touching housing development probably has 3 other jobs. They probably volunteer with 2 other organizations. They might drive a bus, they volunteer Sunday school, and then cut hair on the weekends. So, it's one of these things where, unlike, more sophisticated, larger developers, either that are statewide or national, who you might have a project team of 5 to 8 people managing each step of the development process, your developers out here they're doing that job and then they're doing all their other jobs at the same time. And none of those other things can be put on hold while that project is in a, intensive part of its life cycle, either an application or construction closing. But the biggest one that I think I've seen personally that's both a challenge and an opportunity is building out services and resident support infrastructure. And in my mind, and I've come from a construction background, I come from a family of builders. Building the physical thing, it's tough, it's hard work, takes a lot of time, but it's doable. And the thing that's been a real learning curve for me, and that's a real challenge I'm going to bet for most people in this room, is when you're standing up a project that has permanent supportive housing, has mental health housing, that has veterans that need wraparound services, the service organizations and infrastructure that you might find in a metro area community simply does not exist in most communities in Eastern Oregon, or if it does, it has never before interacted with a permanent housing resource. And so as an organization like ours comes into a community, we're not only thinking about, where is the available land, where are we going to get funding, who's going to be the contractor, but then we're going out there to really say, who are the connections locally that we need to make, and then how can we support those local agencies to stand them up and create that robust services infrastructure. Because, the project isn't complete when you have the grand opening and after lease up. It's really only begun at that point. And so for us, that's been both the biggest challenge, but the most rewarding aspect of delivering new developments is being able to have a services team that then shows up. So when somebody gets locked out of their apartment and decides to throw a brick through their window to get in at 2 a.m, this just happened at one of our properties last week, we have a service provider who then sends us an email about this client and says, hey, I'm meeting with them today to talk to them about where can you maybe put a lockbox, or where do you want to have a spare key? Does that want to be with me so I can help you into your apartment? Those are the really, really critical parts of, you jump through all the barriers to get a project built, but then it really matters that you've created durable, strong partnerships and local connections. And then as folks that are working statewide and maybe are able to bring some other resources to bear, we're showing up and doing our best to help support those agencies, help prop them up, help get them access to technical assistance. So, that's both the challenge, but then I think also probably the strongest opportunity and the strongest strength that all of our communities in Eastern Oregon has is y'all are creative. Y'all roll up your sleeves and just get it done, because you know that the cavalry isn't coming to ride in and save you. Like, you've got to do it yourself.
I'll speak more from a particular project case study, as I said earlier. We just recently achieved stabilized occupancy, and are about to convert to perm loan on an affordable housing development in Pendleton. Horizon Projects, HPI. For those who aren't familiar with HPI, they're a nonprofit organization based out of Milton Freewater, but serve throughout Umatilla County, and their mission is to serve adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD. And they have wanted to expand their mission to develop more affordable housing as a way of integrating their IDD clients into community housing. And so we took on a project called South Hill Commons. It is a 70-unit multifamily housing, affordable housing development that also includes a standalone group home for adults with IDD. And 10 of the 70 units are also set aside for folks with IDD who have gained the skills to live more independently. Still a lot of services, but they can manage their own apartment and live within the community. And so a really exciting concept to try to form integrated communities and really serve their client base in a more holistic way, and to create this sense of independence. And yes, it did have its challenges. More from the kind of the design construction standpoint. The biggest challenge, I think, to start off with is we were trying to really focus on universal and inclusive design because of the community we were trying to serve. And so naturally, we chose a site that had a 50-foot drop from one end to the other, and trying to figure out how to make that work. And we may have some time later. I've actually got some slides of the project to show how we ended up terracing the site and integrating ramps and accessibility modes into the design and into the community assets of the design. But that was challenge number one. Challenge number two, some really tricky land use processes. It was a site that the city owned, and through a lot of relationship building, made the site available to HPI at no cost, I'm pretty sure. But there is no such thing as free land. And so it had some land use challenges. We had to end up replatting the property, as well as once we consolidated the parcels through a replat, we then had to carve off a piece for the group home under separate ownership and funding. And so a lot of land use maneuvering through all of that. We also, within Pendleton, you can do multifamily housing through a conditional use process. So through all of that, we also had a conditional use process that we had to go through. There was also...
Did put up
Oh, there we
your
go.
project. If
Okay.
there's a specific slide
Yeah.
you want to show.
Yeah. And if we go, I think, forward a couple, so there's, yeah, that's the fun stuff under construction, where we're actually carving up the land and terracing it. And then, and Kevin, you could just kind of keep winding through that, just fun picture show while I'm talking. I also really wanted to harken back to what Commissioner Timmons said earlier, and in her capacity as a local supplier, subcontractor. We did run into that challenges of workforce capacity, subcontractor capacity. And that's both related to just physical capacity, the number of people who are in the workforce and the availability of people who can actually do the job, but also just acknowledging that our buildings are getting more complicated. The systems we're employing are getting more complicated. And where we, maybe on the west side, we take it more for granted that the subcontracting community understands these more complex systems. When we're over here on the east side doing work, there's more training involved, or in some cases having to bring workforce over from the valley who are capable of working with some of these more complex systems. And so I'm really excited to hear some of the talk about more training opportunities here and growing the workforce and growing the subcontracting community, both in quantity and in education of some of the newer systems that we're employing in our work. So I think that's really important. I want to piggyback on some of the things that Clayton was saying just real quickly on why this project eventually succeeded. And it really was about relationships and collaboration and partnerships. Terri spent a lot of time leading up to this project, developing deep relationships in the community. And I know Capco is represented here, Paula Hall and some of her team are here, and they formed a very close collaboration on this project, and Capco is involved in the ongoing services component of the project. I believe, Roger, there was some early conversations with the Housing Authority. I'm not sure there was anything formal that came out of it, but a lot of outreach, trying to develop partnerships. A lot of close working relationship with the City of Pendleton, with Umatilla County, with representatives in the state legislature, really building those relationships. And as I talk about tricky sites and tricky land use processes, I know we as the architects were out there early and often really developing relationships with the local planning folks and building officials. And so as we would encounter these challenges from the mayor's office and the county board, we could rely on people coming together and really trying to solve these problems together. And so as tricky as the replat was or the conditional use was, we all knew we were pulling in the same direction, and it really smoothed the process, and we all knew we were going to get there eventually. Took time, but we all had confidence we were going to get there. So.
I think we could go on to the next question, unless Sean and Becky, if you wanted to respond to this question. Okay. Okay. So, despite significant increases in state public resources approved for affordable housing development in recent legislative sessions, we know there's still a deficit of resources, as Clayton referred to, gap financing to address increasing or escalating cost increases, insurance costs, et cetera, affecting all aspects of the development process. So looking ahead, what are some of the resources that are needed to successfully expand affordable housing production? And for Sean and Becky, maybe you can refer to there's some new public resources coming online to leverage existing resources for like connecting infrastructure and technical assistance to local jurisdictions. Who wants to go first, Becky or Sean?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's an excellent question. And I want to also connect back to that last response because I think there are a few themes that you can take out of this and really highlights how the state's role is changing. Because at DLCD, what housing planning was like, do you have enough land? Is it zoned appropriately? Set it and forget it, and the market will take care of the rest. See you next time, right? And I think what we like, you can just see this. I mean, obviously in these two examples, but you see this statewide. There's no one way to address it. Like that's obviously insufficient, but there's so many different challenges that can come up that make housing development generally, but especially affordable housing development with wraparound services, very difficult to build in the first place and then ensure that it's actually meeting the needs of people on the ground, right? And I think where good work really happens, where you're able to overcome those, are where you form those types of partnerships, those types of relationships, especially with local leaders, of course with state officials too, to overcome those barriers and actually get the outcomes that you want to see, get the housing built, ensure that people are having their needs met, right? And I think one of the big changes that we're having at DLCD is this broader recognition that the state needs to step up as a partner, right? They need to step up with the resources, they need to step up with the support, the technical assistance to really help both developers and local leaders on the ground be able to navigate the process, ensure the processes are conducive to housing development, and overcome those types of barriers that you see on the ground. I'll just, I don't want to spend too much time on kind of a diatribe here, but the ways that DLCD's roles are changing are really trying to emphasize this, that both at the local level and at the state level, there is this recognition that we need to be taking actions within our control to facilitate housing production, affordability, and choice. That takes its shape in a lot of bureaucratic terms that I'm not going to talk about. The short answer is, there's going to be these kind of growing responsibilities and expectations that we are taking actions collectively, all of us, right, that facilitate these outcomes. And that includes on the state side, and this is something that is a new program that was part of the governor's housing production framework that was part of the 2024 legislative session, a better coordination of resources at the state end, right? One of the things that this bill established is this thing called a Housing Accountability and Production Office. And their role is really on the ground when you have development of housing, market rate or affordable, it's going to run into barriers, and you need a resource on the state side to help you navigate those, be it, we're experiencing these, code barriers or regulatory barriers, or we just need better coordination of funding. What's out there? What are the different agencies with different funding pots available, and how do we access those, right? And so this is something, obviously it's new, we're still hiring, actually we just started hiring really to get this office staffed, but I think as it develops, I think one of the things that our agency will need to be really sensitive to is what are those needs that are happening on the ground, and how can the office be responsive and coordinating among all these different state agencies who've frankly historically not really done a good job or have not had the infrastructure to coordinate very well. To do better and to be able to form those partnerships and overcome those barriers. That's really what I wanted to speak to there. I know that's not like this funding pot, it's a little bit more high level, but maybe I'll pass it over to Becky to talk about some more specific things that Business Oregon's doing.
Yeah, I have, excuse me, I have money. So you all like me right now. So under Senate Bill 1537, it created a housing infrastructure support fund within our agency, and it also allowed me to have my new position. So I'm excited about that. The bill provided $3 million to make support available for municipalities for assisting with local financing opportunities, state and federal grant navigation, writing, review, and administration of that grant, resource sharing, regional collaboration support, and technical support. It could include engineering and design assistance or other capacity as we start bringing up this program. So what I would ask of this group, because you all represent municipalities, developers, consultants, you have a broad range of information here. We work mostly with municipalities, but we also want to make sure that what we do, what we create, what we stand up as a program is something that will benefit municipalities to get you onto the track to build that affordable housing. So we would ask you to help us define what capacity means to your community, because what it means to somebody in Malheur County might not be what it means to somebody in Wallowa. So we want to not try to make it one size fits all, so we want to have your input. So you can find me after, you can put a sticky note on here and say, Becky, this is what capacity means to me, or go to our website, I can give you my email address, I don't have any slides, and just give me that information so that we can create a program that benefits you. And just to clarify, when we talk about infrastructure, housing infrastructure, we're talking about water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation. So like you had to dig up the road to replace the pipe, you need to put the road back the way it was, or better if you can. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about, and those infrastructure investments by the municipality leads to the housing units. So again, there's the nexus. It can't just be, oh, well, our water system is, it just needs to be fixed. So can you pay for that? Well, no, unless it's gonna be like, I can't have one more toilet in one more house because my system is like at capacity. So just making sure we're all on the same terms and pages there. The other thing going forward to, when we were talking about budget, yes, we are also in our budget planning. And I talked with Matt Schabold from the governor's office during break, and I said, I just want you to know that you and I are going to be the most popular because we're going to ask for $110 million for housing infrastructure, which would actually get from your the support for the capacity. The intent is to take that, what you did, that design work or whatever you did, to get you into that construction phase. This $3 million is not construction, but the $110 million can help us get us to the next step. So I just wanted you to know that we're now the most popular people in the room. So I think that's where I will stop. But
And
again,
Becky, how much do y'all find yourselves, or do you anticipate finding yourselves either being matchmakers between developers and cities, or kind of playing that intermediary role when somebody like me says, dang, I'm going to blow my budget up with this new water line.
Right.
Hey, Becky, can you talk to the city I'm working in? How is that relationship going to work?
Great question, and I think that's actually where the play is really going to work, because we know that the development that the developers are putting together is very costly, and please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that when a developer comes into a municipality, the developer is responsible for putting in all that infrastructure. Is that correct? They can be. Most of the time they are. And then when you're done, you're like, here, city, here's your system, right? Like that piece that's municipally owned. Exactly. So now it's added on to the cost of the housing. Yay, I got it right. I'm excited about that. So with the actual construction component, if we work with the municipality and we can provide this in maybe some sort of an incentive, maybe grant, we don't know what this is going to look like. So I'm going to caveat all of this with, we don't know what the legislation will look like. But our thought process is, if we can provide a municipality with some funding to help do that development build out that the developer doesn't have to do, then your units, we would think, are not going to cost as much, and now we can pencil a project a little bit better. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally does, and I think that can be beneficial, especially for LIHTC projects, which Brian was talking about earlier, as that's one of our biggest funding sources, is often in the ground infrastructure costs. Depends on your investor and your accountant, but typically those are not basis eligible. So those funds coming directly into a project don't do a whole lot of benefit, and actually showing yet another source can create more attorney and accountant time on our end. So having those funds channel through a city, the city's going to manage, all the environmental approvals. They're going to be putting that money into paying their public works crews, which is local dollars on the ground. Those are all great things to hear, that's how y'all are kind of envisioning that funding is going to work.
Yeah, and we know that there's also just system capacity challenges. Like I was just sharing with a friend yesterday, like we know that there's some municipalities that don't have a moratorium, but they're not approving permits. So I don't know why you don't call it what it is. It's a moratorium, right? So if you have capacity challenges, this may be another potential where you connect that but for type of a thing, but for some infrastructure funding, we can't approve any more permits for the development, even though we have a developer ready to go and they want to build out, but we've got $10 million, $12 million of system improvements we have to make before we can even build anything. So I think we're going to see more of those conversations occurring. We're already hearing them. And in my time as the Special Public Works Fund program person, we were starting to see more municipalities actually use the Special Public Works Fund to build out municipally owned infrastructure to a site. Because again, we work with municipalities at our agency. Our partners at OHCS work with the developers, we work with the municipalities. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration going forward. So I think that this will create the ability to get housing units built, hopefully at a little bit faster pace, I think. So that's what I know.
I have something to add to that as well. Just so relating that or kind of dovetailing that with the new worker process, we mentioned that we've sort of deconstructed the applications process to be into 3 steps. We're hopeful that this is going to make it a little bit easier for developers as well, just with this new process being that the first step, we call it the impact assessment step. We really don't get largely into the budget of the project. We don't require committed funds. So for, like, if the project needs infrastructure and still looking for resources to make that happen, that wouldn't prevent a project from starting with OHCS and potentially getting an intent to fund the deal. So that's kind of an exciting aspect. I think that our developers are really going to love the ability to have, be able to get started. Once we move into that next step, the financial eligibility step, that's where we start to solidify. But again, it's creating a lot more flexible time. Projects in the past, I love to work with metaphors. In the past, applying for an application was like a surfer trying to catch a wave, and you just had to paddle as fast as you could and hope that you found your ground on it and you were going with it. But if you didn't, then it was kind of sorry, there's next year. Now it's really more on the pace of the project, and so the project's able to move forward. We do have some desired timelines that we communicate about moving forward. But there's a lot more flexibility in really being able to progress when the project's ready to, and there's not really a detriment to the project itself for taking longer for things that are really out of its control, and so that's something that we're excited about.
You know that we had one other pre-planned question, but how about if we see if there's audience questions, and then if we have time, we can take that one. So, you're on call with the microphone again.
Once again, I have 2 questions. So the first one is for Ed Brown. How do you let projects know of alternative funding opportunities within their communities? So like the share funding, supporting Health for All through reinvestment, and other organizations' funding that's available.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's sort of 2 things that come to mind. One, we have a new technical advisory group that is able to work directly with partners about when we do have funding that we know of that's available. We can try to point toward other resources that we're aware of and that you may not be, and able to also give advice around. It's like, well, that doesn't statutorily work, but if you were to shift just slightly to the left, that would. That's another really exciting component of, in the past, you had to apply if your proposal really, if something about the proposal really prevented it from being eligible. Again, it was sort of that, it's how you were close, but there's next year, and we can tell you why it didn't make it this year. With the ORCA process now, we could really just say, like, it's not eligible for just this sole reason, and if you could change that, then it could be eligible according to statute. And so you can just turn right around, make those adjustments, and come right back into our review. And so that's something that is also a lot more collaborative. As far as resources go, again, pointing towards our website, we have a whole page that's dedicated to all the resources that are currently available. And so we're also launching our new resources dashboard that is really a live ticker. It'll be updated monthly as to how much resources are still available versus how many resources we started with. And so that's something that's also available. And so currently we just have the resources that are available for the biennium. The dashboard is being launched. I know it's being launched this month. Yeah.
So as a CCO, when we have our share funding cycle come around, would that be something that we would want to share with you so that it can be on the website or something that there are funds available?
Possibly. I would say, yeah, I wouldn't say that that's out of the question. I think that we would definitely be interested in being aware of other resources that are available to help kind of connect some of those dots. I think that's really a lot of what our technical advisory group is there to help provide.
Perfect, thank you. And then for my second question, Clayton, it's for you. So the share funding, we have that, and is the amount significant enough? So currently it's $250,000 is the ceiling on that. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And what about like the 3-year timeline? Is that adequate for being able to apply for the funds, receive the funds, and use the funds?
Yeah, well, I applied for a $500 Rotary Club grant on a project recently to help fund a playground, and so I'm by hook or by crook. For some folks, there's there are going to be cutoffs. I think for most of the folks that are doing projects in rural areas in this room, you're like, I'll take, like, hell, we'll do a bake sale. So yeah, I would say that is a very much an impactful amount of money when we're talking about what's in the field of play, and other local resources. And one of the things I like to think about is early in funding that punches above its weight. So when you can get funds, especially flexible funds, that I can pay for survey, phase 1, environmental consultants, I can pay for early design work, all those things. And, we're NHA, Northwest Housing Alternatives, we're a larger nonprofit. We do have some flexible pre-development resources. So many smaller nonprofits that are trying to do a development, they don't have an extra $50,000 or $100,000 to pony up to get, just do the basic due diligence they need to then go to ed and get into that first phase. So that's really where, if you were to look at the end of a project, let's say it's a 40-unit project that's, $18 million, that $250,000, it's going to be a minuscule amount of that overall capital stack, but the timing of it is going to be really critical. And I think that's what's so cool about y'all's funding source and other flexible grant sources out there. And I also want to give props to, I think, just the fact that we got 3 state agencies represented here. 6 years ago when I started working, with OHCS and other agencies, there was a lot of rigidity on the underwriting criteria that was written into the funding resources we got. And often OHCS was the most skittish partner on those calls, on those closing calls, and was the one that was least willing to flex on those underwriting criteria. I'm going to say that's done almost a 180 over the last couple of years, and just huge props to be going through COVID and material price increases, like all the trials and tribulations, which the private markets, both on tax credit investors and on banks, have reacted the exact opposite. Used to be a lot of easy capital out there that was really flexible. They have flipped that on their head. I have 10, 20 email chain long emails going of questions about minuscule little details on underwriting from private, banks and investors. And we do not have that kind of relationship with our state funders anymore, with some of our local grant providers. So I think that's really where it's like we should all be, and again, the ORCA process is kind of highlighting this, is like we should all be really working collaboratively, but also transparently about this project. I think it's really critical, but there's also, I have a massive need here. Who's here to help, and how flexible can you be in your underwriting criteria?
Additional questions?
I got a question for you. I'm Glenda Moyer with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. I'm the Eastern Oregon Education Outreach Coordinator. We have so many counties in Eastern Oregon, so I'll try to explain this the best way. All parts of Eastern Oregon are rural. We have our local city jurisdictions, and then we have our county jurisdictions in those rural areas. City jurisdictions have no problem. Of course, they have to allow for ADU units. It's our county jurisdictions that aren't even addressing it. And I think a lot of it has to come down with assessments that DLCD has been, I think, given that job to do, to assess land in regards to see if folks can actually put ADUs on their properties. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, so to that specific question, there is a bill that enables counties to opt into allowing ADUs on like rural residential parcels. There's some restrictions around it, right? Like we want to make sure that we're limiting wildfire. There's kind of some siting parameters around it. I think there's some like occupancy requirements around it. But it is a tool that counties are able to use if they want to facilitate the development of ADUs. On rural residential lands, just speaking to the technical aspects of that. Are you trying to also get more at the kind of relationship between counties and cities in addressing?
What I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of folks that live in these rural county areas that want to do ADUs, but their counties aren't even addressing it. And I don't know if they know who to reach out to, the information they need to get, how they should devise those policies. The fact is there's so much ADU housing that could be out there available to folks. Okay, to lessen our housing need, but our counties aren't addressing it because they just don't. I don't think they know who to reach out to or how to even coordinate that.
Yeah, and so this is one of those areas where right when something's optional, right, the biggest barrier becomes one of capacity. I mean, it's true when something's mandatory, right. In the state of Oregon, the state has to pony up the funding, right, in order to implement that for local governments. But in the case where something is optional, right, what you'll see is, there might be a handful of jurisdictions that take advantage of something, but then there are others that, maybe for a variety of reasons, they could be political, they could be capacity oriented, that they're not able to take advantage of a particular policy. Where we come into the picture to be able to support counties is in the provision of technical resource and funding. And counties actually play a lot of roles in the relationship of how housing is developed on the ground. They're actually a really important partner in ensuring that land is made development ready, right? Like, for example, if land is annexed into a city, there's a transfer that happens, right? And so that relationship that counties and cities have and the actions that they take on are actually really important. But I think one of the evolving places, in kind of like the understanding of state law is how do we balance that with the fact that we know that counties are very resource restricted, right? And I think this just kind of points to a broader, this is true in cities too, it points to a broader need for just greater investment in those types of capacity constraints that counties face. I do want to say, with that answer in mind, I don't know the specifics of why the counties make the decisions that they do. I want to be clear about that. But just to kind of speak to that issue generally, counties do play an important role, but there's this big barrier, especially as you get into more rural communities related to capacity.
Is there another question? How about over on this side? Run. So it's probably just time for one more question.
Worked with Brian and his group, not only for South Hill Commons, but for our Promise Inn, which was the first shelter to pop up in Eastern Oregon. My question is about the affordability of housing projects, and the last session talked about having set aside money for Eastern Oregon, which is great. And we, in Pendleton, we had South Hill Commons. We also had an 80-unit project, which is Wildflower. We always call it something else, but Wildflower property. And so we've had a lot of growth, right? And in order for a housing property, an affordable housing property, to be affordable for a developer, it has to pencil out. And in order for it to pencil out, you have to have quite a few units. And some of our communities, and as you guys drove out here to join us in Eastern Oregon, there are a lot of pocket communities that don't need or cannot sustain 40, 60, 80 unit properties, but could certainly maintain a 20 unit or a 22 or something like that. But those projects for a developer do not pencil out. They just simply do not. So the person who is living in a very rural/frontier community should have access and be able to stay in the community that they were born, raised, and now are working in. So how do we address that? And could there some way, not only about the set aside for rural, but really housing desert communities? It's going to cost more, but is it worth investing more dollars to take care of those small communities?
That's probably a good segue to the next session that was going to be talking about what are the needs looking into the future? What is our vision for the future? So maybe someone could speak to that at the next panel, but that's a tough one for maybe this group. Any feedback?
Do you want to go?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just speak to because this is a broad question, and when you get into it, like, there are so many factors that, some of them are in the control of, say, maybe the local government, some of them are related to the state, and some of them are market forces, right? And like, when it comes to, say, the price of sticks and bricks, right? And I think one of the big kind of components that has been kind of at the heart of a lot of work that we're doing is a recognition that, especially in like a lot of smaller and rural communities, these issues really compound and kind of create these circumstances where, you can't make the project pencil unless there are these kind of major kind of concessions that, maybe the community is not able to accommodate, right? And so I think one of the big kind of aspects that's part of the policy is this idea that where DLCD can really play a role is like looking at those types of barriers. What are the types of things that we have the ability to address, both on the state side and on the local side, to make those types of projects pencil? And simultaneously, we are also, we've kind of written up in legislative recommendations, obviously we don't have the money, but we should be, just as a matter of state policy, funding housing that the market does not produce on its own. That includes those in rural communities, obviously affordable housing, things like that. So I think with that, maybe that's a pivot to Ed.
Yeah, one of my only thoughts is, so with the new ORCA manual that we have out, we do have a new subsidy maximums that I think are helping get closer to what housing developers are seeing and needing to be able to create housing even in rural Oregon. Another strategy that we've seen for housing developers to be able to make that pencil is having non-contiguous units within a single project. So really it might be 4 projects in a couple different locales that are non-adjacent, but are able to be considered one project. And so sometimes we're able to find some efficiencies that way. So it really it's 4 20-unit projects when really altogether when we go to fund it, it's 80 units as a single project. And then I'm also just going to tie in the last panel, there's actually another question. It's kind of related to funding. I'm just going to awkwardly throw this in there and answer it. We do have veterans funding that's also dedicated that's an evergreen resource. So out of the document reporting fee back in 2013, 25% of that money that we collect that helps fund, for example, the general housing account goes to serve solely veterans and their families. And so just in this biennium, we have $30 million that it's dedicated for veteran households. And I know that since that time, we've created hundreds of units. I think we're inching up close to 1,000 or more that it's really dedicated towards veterans. And even in here in LaGrande, I know that we have one of our veterans projects is the Veterans Village, I believe is serving 10 units exclusively for veterans and their families.
Yeah, and I'll totally, echo on the developer side. Scattered site projects are the way to be able to make that happen, and that's where the partnership between, either a for-profit or nonprofit, larger statewide developer and local organizations or housing authorities is so important, is being able to say, hey, we're going to develop 3 properties, one in John Day, one in Baker, and one in Ontario, and be able to leverage both financial resources, but then also contractor, subcontractor resources into those. Because, 20 units does not pencil for almost anybody, but if you can stack a couple of those projects together, it starts to be feasible. If you can get into some 80 unit ranges on a scattered site, then you start to get into your 4% LIHTC territory. So it's a smart way to do it. And it's also awesome that the department through their ORCA process is still totally open to that scattered site concept.
Can I do one just last I know.
30 seconds.
All I was going to say is that might be a perfect example of where capacity funding could assist, because we could look at a regionalized approach. So if you've got, like, like we're talking about here, if you've got a regionalized approach, but you got to figure out somebody how to get all the I's dotted, T's crossed, it might be something that I'll definitely keep in consideration as I'm developing the program.
Well, I want to thank the panelists. So let's give them a round of applause.